Thanks for joining us for this webinar on the new forms and contracts made by our CCRA contract committee. We have on here Becky Ashby with Remax Purpose Driven, Matt Carroll with Keller Williams Palmetto, both co-chairs of the contract committee, and Gary Pickering with Blair Cato, Pickering Castline, sorry, all tongue-tied,
Who's that?
who is an attorney that sits on our contract committee, here to kind of go over the new forms. All these forms are available to you as members on Zip Forms, and you can access those for free with your membership with CCRA. We are recording this, and it will be posted on our YouTube and social media pages after we're done, but I'll turn it over to Gary to start the webinar, and you guys can ask questions in the Q&A, and Matt and Becky will answer those for you. So Gary, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, guys, appreciate y'all coming in today so we can talk about the changes to the addendums. For some reason, I can't get this one addendum to enlarge, the other one is, but well, this one's got two minor changes, so we'll address that quickly. Nevertheless, let's talk about the two addendums we're looking at. We're looking at a sell and close addendum. We're also looking at the closing contingency addendum. I do want to use this time here to talk about the fact that we do have in our contract a provision under paragraph 20 where you're supposed to be denoting whether or not the contract is contingent on the sell and close of another property, or if it's contingent on the close of another property. So be sure that you are completing section 20 in its entirety. And that doesn't mean that if you have the addendum, you check the box, and then you don't if you do not. If you don't have one, you have to go and affirmatively check the box is not attached on both of those. So I've seen a lot of contracts that come in that just have it either X'd out or the question is not answered. So those questions do need to be answered under 20A. Is it or is it not contingent on sell and close contingency? And same thing for B, which is closing contingency. Is it or is it not attached to the contract? So be sure that you are completing those sections under paragraph 20. Now we have two contingency addendums we're going to look at. One is the closing contingency and one is the sell and close. Quickly, what is the difference in the two? Closing contingency says that I am buying your house. I want to make an offer to buy your house, and that I have another house that is already under contract, scheduled to close. And in order for me to complete the closing of purchasing your house, my house has to close before. So that's a closing contingency. It's a little bit different than the state. The state only has one form. We have two forms. So we separate ours. They do theirs all together. So that's going to be your closing contingency. I have a house. I've got to sell it before, or I got to close on it before I can purchase your house. I'm already under contract. Now, the second one we're going to talk about is the sell and close contingency. The sell and close contingency says, I want to buy your house. I have a house I have to sell before I can buy your house, but it's not under contract. And in some cases, it might not even be listed for sale at this point. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Now, I call this the prayer shifting contract. This is instead of you praying that you sell your house as a seller, you're now praying that the buyer sells their house so they can buy your house. So there's a big difference in the two of them. We're going to talk about those in a second. I apologize on the screen for a reason unbeknownst to me yesterday when I pulled it up. I could actually enlarge it. Today, for some reason, it doesn't want to enlarge. But this is the closing contingency addendum. I'm going to go over it, so don't worry about it if you can't really see it. This, again, is the contingency that is used when a buyer is making an offer and they must close on the house that they currently own, and it's currently under contract to close. Now, the one thing that I think is very important to recognize is that the way that the contract committee designed these forms is so that you use one form and only one form. There's a lot of misunderstanding there that if you use a sell and close contingency contract addendum form, that when the contract moves now from sell and close to close, that now you got to go get the close contingency addendum signed. That's not how it works. In both of the documents, it talks about how the document is moves from sell and close to close automatically by the completion of certain events. So the idea here is that you only use one form, and when the event occurs, it automatically moves you to the second type of contingency. So that's important to understand that. Before I go over the document, I would be remiss if I did not mention the fact that this committee has worked tirelessly over the last couple of years, not only in updating the contract last year, which I think was very well received. I haven't heard anybody say anything but good comments about how well the contract was revised. But the contract committee also spent a lot of time this past year looking at these addendums and trying to make these addendums better for you to use. And I would be remiss if I didn't recognize Becky and Matt. They continue to spend a lot of their free time. And, you know, one of the things that I always say about this community, the real estate community, is that agents, more than probably any other profession that I know, give their time freely to others. And that's what Becky and Matt and everybody that serves on the contract committee do. They give a lot of their time freely when they could be out selling houses, showing houses, doing things that put income in their pocket. They give back to the community and give back to the Realtors Association. And I'm real proud of this committee for doing that, particularly Becky and Matt, because leading these committees is not an easy thing. As anybody who's on this podcast or this webinar could attest to, if you've ever been on any of these committees at the Realtors Associations, it's time consuming, but it's very rewarding. So thank you for all of y'all's hard work. So looking at the closing contingency, how we look at the contingency here, it's very short. Again, I have a house. I want to buy your house. My house is under contract. I need it to close before I close yours. As you can see at the top of the addendum, it's just the identification sections there for the seller or the buyer, property address. The first paragraph remains the same, that this is an addendum to an existing contract. To the extent any of the terms that you add in here conflict with the actual contract, these terms in this addendum are actually going to control. It also states very importantly that all the terms of the contract not modified by the addendum stay the same. Paragraph 2 is where we made the actual changes. The contract is contingent on the completion of the closing of the sale of buyer's property. Very self-explanatory. It's what we've been talking about. This is where we've changed it. Buyer has accepted a contract on the property that either 1, does not have, or 2, does have active contingencies other than financing or appraisal. So if the contract is contingent on appraisal or it's contingent on financing, you're going to check the, and that's it. You're going to check the box that it does not have any other contingencies. But if there's any contingencies whatsoever, you would check the box that it does have. So think about some of the contingencies. The person that's buying that house has a sell and close contingency. You would need to check and then disclose the fact that they have a sell and close contingency. That's a big factor, because if I'm willing to accept a closing contingency from you, but you have a sell and close contingency on the house that you're trying to sell, that's not going to be a very good situation for anybody. So this is an opportunity here for the seller to have full understanding of any contingencies that are on the property. So this is a very good change that the committee came up with. The next and final change to this document is due diligence period and repair negotiations on the buyer's property must be completed or waived on or before blank date. The previous iteration had and or. I'm not sure why we had that in the past, but for some reason we had and or. The or made it confusing in some aspects, so we eliminated the word or. So it's now the due diligence period and the repair negotiations on the buyer's property must be completed or waived. And this gives y'all an opportunity to decide when this period may have to be completed. So you may say, I want it completed now, like it's already done, or it's going to be completed in a day, or it might be 10-day due diligence, whatever the parties agree to. So this is a negotiated term for y'all to complete there. But the main change, and really the only change there, was changing the word and or to and. We list the property's address here for you to fill in. The remainder of this document stays the same, but we'll go over it really quick with you. Buyer under 2A has to provide any documentations or updates associated with the sale of the property upon request. And then B, seller may continue to market seller's property for sale. However, any offer receives will be negotiated as a backup contract. Very important to understand this provision. If you have a closing contingency offer on your property and you accept that as a ratified contract, you may not trump that contract with another better offer. Doesn't matter if it's for more money, doesn't matter if it's cash, doesn't matter what the reason. Any other offer that comes in is accepted only as a backup offer. You cannot move this contract, once accepted and ratified, out of first position and into second position because you got another offer that came in. Very important to understand that. Paragraph C, buyer to notify seller in writing of any changes regarding sale of buyer's property that would negatively affect the term of the contract. So if anything happens on this contingency, the buyer is trying to buy your property by selling theirs. If they find out the closing is going to be delayed for a couple of days, if it's going to fall through, anything that's going to be a negative impact on this closing, they actually have a duty, an affirmative duty, to notify this seller in writing of that change. It's not just picking up the phone and calling the other agent, it's notifying them in writing. Paragraph D, if contract on buyer's property is voided, buyer to notify seller in writing within 1 business day, and either they have two options. One is they can remove the closing contingency with written verification of the ability of buyer's financing institution and proceed with the sale. So what that basically says in a nutshell is if I'm trying to sell my property and the person buying my house falls through, I can come back to you and say, okay, I'm willing to move forward basically without this contingency, but I have to prove to you through my financial institution that I'm using to buy the money, get the money, whether it's through cash or whether it's through a loan. I have to provide you written information showing you that I can buy the property without selling my house. Can't do that, then you're not going to complete this contingency. Number two, you can move from a sell or closing contingency over to a sell and closing contingency by agreement of both parties. So I am no longer a close contingency because my closing fell through on the sale of my house. So I want to stay in this game, but I have to still sell my house. So now I'm going to have to move to a sell and close contingency. And that's by parties agreeing. You stay with the same document, but you would move over to a sell and close. If the agreement cannot be reached, the contract becomes null and void, and earnest money will be released back to the buyer, obviously subject to the terms of 40-57. Closing contingency does not delay any contract of sale timelines, including due diligence. Very important provision here, because what this is telling us is that even though you're under a closing contingency, your deadlines for doing your due diligence, for applying for the loan, for doing everything that you're required to do under the contract, start the day the contract's ratified. So it doesn't delay anything because we're under this closing contingency. All right, so that in the nutshell is the closing contingency. To recap, it's basically two changes. We've added the provision does not have or does have other active contingencies other than financing or appraisal. So if you have no other contingencies, the answer is it does not. If you have other contingencies, it does. My suggestion is under paragraph 4, if there are other contingencies, I would list out what those other contingencies are when you make the offer so that the seller will have the information in front of them, and it will save some time in negotiation. And then the only other change there is we changed the word and repair negotiations on buyer's properties must be completed or waived by that date.
Hey,
All right.
hey Gary, just one point of clarification real quick. If you go back to that real quick, if the contract were to fall through and you jump to a sale and close contingency, I think the intention is that you would take the sale and close contingency addendum and submit that.
Yeah, you're actually right. I'm sorry, I misstated that. Yeah, because it's by agreement, and that's the best way to do it by agreement would be by that document. Yes, correct. Yep. Okay, good. All right, so that's the closing contingency. So let's move over to the sell and close contingency. So the sell and close contingency, to reiterate again, is I want to buy your house. I must sell my house before I buy your house, but I don't even have it under contract. And in some cases, I may not even have it listed at this point. So this is the contract. I call it, as I've said earlier, living on a prayer contract, like the Bon Jovi song. You know, I'm praying now that somebody will buy your house instead of somebody will buy my house. I'm not really sure the why these are so important, but anyway, just my take. All right, so let's talk about this addendum here. Sell and close, this one starts off the same, having the provisions here of the seller, buyer, property address. Same paragraph 1, that the terms here are going to prevail if there's things that contradict each other, and then all terms of the contract not modified will remain the same. All right, we start making the changes here in yellow. Number 2, the paragraph starts off as it already had. The contract is contingent on the sale and closing of buyer's property not later than the closing date agreed to in paragraph 7 of the contract. So if the bottom line here is your date to do this must be earlier or the same as the date in the contract. Can't be closing on this after you're buying my property because it's on sell and close contingency. Property is located at the following address. We have a blank here for you to list the property address. And then the change here begins under A. Buyer represents that the buyer's property identified above is or is not currently listed with the real estate brokerage. You need to disclose whether you've listed it or not. Then we've added these two provisions. If property is not currently listed, it will be actively listed on its local MLS on or before blank date. Negotiated term between the buyer and the seller as to when the date is. Typically, when the buyer is making this offer, what we're hopeful is that if the property isn't on the MLS, they've already taken steps to get with an agent, and they're planning on having it maybe put on the MLS tomorrow or whatever, but we're trying to get that information to the seller so the seller can decide at this point, do they or do they not want to accept an offer based on the fact that this property may not even be on the multiple listing service at this time. The
Gary,
second, go ahead.
all right, that was also one of the things that some people in some cases say, well, we aren't going to list our house unless we know we can go under contract on this one at the price we want to go under contract on. So this gives the ability to say, hey, that's fine. You don't have to list it and then sell your house, and then you don't get this one, and then you're stuck selling your house without buying the one you wanted to.
Very good.
That was my answer at that also.
And then it says, or seller will have the option of voiding the contract. So if the property is not listed on the MLS in the time frame set forth here by the parties, then the seller has the option of voiding the contract. It doesn't make the contract automatically void. It gives the seller the option of voiding it. So if it says it has to be done by November 28th and they get it on the 29th and the seller's fine with that, that's fine. We move on and the contract will continue. If the contract is voided, earnest money is going to be released back to the buyer. See paragraph 6D, which talks about the release of earnest money. Now under paragraph A2, the brokerage and agent who has or will be have the property listed. We're going to have a blank here now for you to list that brokerage and the agent. I think the idea here is that it allows the seller's agent to pick up the phone and contact the other broker to find out, in fact, have y'all signed agency, and are you going to list the property? And if so, when are you going to list it? So that they'll have more information so the seller can make a and more educated decision here. Section B, seller may continue to market seller's property and can accept a subsequent offer to purchase under the following terms. So now we're talking about other offers come in. Do these offers stay in first position? Do they trump the other offer and move in front? So what are we looking at here? So under section B1, any subsequent offer that does not contain a sale and closing contingency may be accepted as a primary contract. That's a very important statement. It does not change from the original iteration of this. So basically, if I'm under sale and close contingency, if somebody comes and makes a second offer that I like better, as long as it doesn't have a sell and close contingency in it, I can make that my new primary contract. It does not matter what the dollar value is in that contract. So if Matt and I are under contract, he's going to buy my house and he's offered me $200,000 under a sell and close contingency contract, and Becky comes to me and wants to make an offer even for $175,000, but it's not contingent on sell and close, I can accept Becky's offer as my primary contract and move Matt out. Now, if Becky, however, brings me a contract for $50,000 more than Matt, but it in fact is a sell and close contingency, just like Matt's is, Matt stays in first place, Becky can be accepted as a backup offer. The whole point here is you cannot bump a sell and close contract with another sell and close contingency contract, regardless if it has better terms or not. Doesn't matter. Okay. In the yellow, this is new wording. Parties may agree to have this contingent contract become a backup contract by using Form CCRA 13, Backup Contract Addendum. So if this contract here, the one that I have with Matt for $200,000 is my primary contract, and Becky comes in and offers a non-contingent contract, even at less money, and I want to take her contract, I notify Matt in writing that I have now accepted Becky's offer. She's now my primary, and now I have the conversation with Matt. Matt, do you want to now be a backup to this offer in case Becky and my deal falls through? And if Matt says yes, then I'm going to whip out CCRA -13, the backup contract addendum, which again shows us one of the wonderful things we did last change in the contract is assigning numbers to all of our contracts, which makes them easy to identify the different addendums. So if in that situation, Matt says, yes, I want to do that, I want to be back up to Becky's contract, then he and I would sign the CCRA 13 backup contract addendum. If, however, we don't agree, Matt does not want that, or maybe I don't want the backup contract for some odd reason, then the contract between me and Matt becomes void and earnest money is going to be released back to Matt. Again, subject to 40-57-136, I think it is. All right. B2 says the same. Any subsequent offer that does not contain a sell and close contingency may only be accepted as a backup. kind of reiterates point one, just in a different format.
You
All right.
you said does not, but it does.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. All right. C. If buyer has not accepted an offer on their property or has not otherwise removed this contingency by blank time, either party will have the option of voiding the contract unless both parties agree in writing to an extension. So we're going to put in a time frame here for this to be completed, for us to move from a sell and close contingency, either removing it or moving to a closed contingency. And if that time frame is not satisfied, then either party can void the contract. Or if we want to extend it because you're still my best offer I got, I have no other offers on the table, let's go ahead and extend it for another 15 or 30 days. We have the right of doing that, and we can extend that in writing. If the contract is voided because we get to that magical date and you haven't sold your house and I don't think it's going to happen, or maybe I want to pull my house off the market now, I want to go to a different route, then we void the contract, earnest money goes back to the buyer. Under paragraph D, all contract timelines, including but not limited due diligence, will begin on the date seller or seller's brokers receive written notification that contingency is removed. Very important. When you're under a sell and close contingency, you do not have to begin your due diligence. You do not have to apply for the loan. You do not have to do all the things required in the contract until you either move to a sell contingency or this contingency is completely removed. That's when you start your due diligence. Paragraph 3, the contract will automatically become contingent on closing of buyer's property subject to the following terms of the conditions. All right, so what we're talking about here is that we're basically going to be changing from a sell and close to a closed contingency, and it automatically happens when these things happen. Under paragraph A, buyer has provided written notice to the seller of a ratified contract on the sale of buyer's property. So let's say Matt and I are under a sell and close contingency, and now Becky has given Matt an offer on his house. They've ratified that contract. We may now start the process of moving over to the sell to a closed contingency from a sell and close contingency. But let's see what we all have to do to get there. Paragraph A1 says any due diligence period and or repair negotiations in the sale of the buyer's property are completed, not completed. This is a negotiation. We spent, I don't know, weeks, months arguing this. In the previous iteration of this agreement, of this addendum, it said that they had to be completed, that we did not move from a sell and close until Matt and Becky ratified that contract and completed the due diligence on that property. Once they finished due diligence, then they would notify me in writing, and then we would move from sell and close to close. So the actual due diligence period had to be completed before they could move from sell and close to close. Now it's a negotiated term. And I as a seller may say, well, I would only accept a sell and close contingency contract only under the condition that when a contract comes in, you've completed due diligence, because I think 50% of contracts fall through. I'm making this up. 50% of the contracts fall through due diligence, so I don't trust it. So until you complete due diligence, I'm not willing to let you move over to a closed contingency. On the other hand, when we're negotiating, because Matt's a good agent and he's been really negotiating hard with me, he's like, look, once we get this contract, my guy's going to be good to close. I'm not worried about it. My client's got a pristine house. It's less than a year old. There's not going to be really any due diligence issues here. So once we get under contract, I want us to move to sell. He convinces me. So I'm like, okay, in negotiations, I'll accept that due diligence period repair negotiation does not have to be completed in order for them to move from sell and close to close. I think that's really the prime example of when you could see that is if I had a 1-year-old home. Let's say I had a Lennar home that I just bought, and now I get PCS to another base, and my house is less than a year old. It's still under warranty. I feel pretty good that the due diligence is going to go through without much of much issue, because there's not going to be any repairs. There's not going to be any big issues they have. So I might, in that situation, be more than willing to allow the buyer to move to close contingency, even though they don't finish the due diligence. Under paragraph A2, no active contingencies in the contract other than financing or appraisal. I've seen in the past where people had contingencies on getting jobs here. Actually had that happen where we had a sell and close contingency moved to a closed contingency, but what they didn't disclose in that contract was it was contingent on the buyer getting a job at the University of South Carolina. when the job fell through, the contract fell through, and then we had a big mess because we had moved from selling closed contingency to a closed contingency. So this is no other active contingencies in the contract. Number 3, closing date identified in the contract of the sale of the buyer's property is or on before the date scheduled for this closing. So if Matt is buying my property on December 1st and Becky has now given him a ratified contract, but they're not closing until December 10th, that's not going to work because Matt's telling me in order to buy my property, he's got to sell and close on his. Well, he's closing on his 9 days after he's supposed to be buying mine. How is that going to work? So he and Becky would need to close on or before the date that Matt's buying my property in order for that to work. The rest of this contract stayed the same.
Hey, Gary,
Yes,
could you stop for just 1 second and scroll up a little bit? Written notice, can you just explain what constitutes written notice when the buyer is notifying the seller that their contract or that their property is under contract and meets these terms? Is that an email, a text? It's not a formal document or anything, is
right,
it? Just
right.
some kind of written communication.
You're going to be able to need to prove that you've given the written notice. Text messages are a little bit more concerning to me when we get into an evidentiary issue. Clearly an email that's been responded to. So if I was in the situation, if I was Becky, I'd be emailing me saying, I've gotten we've accepted a contract. It's been ratified. We have completed due diligence as required by the contract. Please accept this as our notice. And then I would ask for a return acknowledgement. That way, when I respond back to Becky saying, got it, now she has evidence not only that she sent it, but I also received it. Because one of the complaints we always have, or you hear in court, is, well, I never saw it. It went to my spam or whatever. So then you get in a big argument as whether or not they received it. So send an email and ask for a return. If you send a text message, ask for a return acknowledgement and then screenshot it so that you have evidence of that. You're wanting to provide evidence or have evidence in case it ever goes to a court as to the hearing. It's also important to recognize here that you're kind of under a race here. I mean, you're trying to hurry and get this done and notify the seller that you're moving from selling closed contingency to closed contingency, because remember, until you're notifying them in writing that you've moved to that closed contingency, that you satisfy the conditions here in this document, they can accept a better offer. And a better offer being any offer that doesn't have a sell and close. So let me give the example again. Matt and I are under contract, sell and close. He's offered me a sell and close contract for $200,000. And then Kim makes an offer to buy his property, but he doesn't notify me quickly. He sits around for a day or two because he's, whatever reason, he's just not being diligent. In the meantime, Becky comes in with a better offer. Well, I'm accepting her better offer. And Matt's going to say, well, no, I've already signed a contract with Kim. You didn't provide me written notice. Becky sent me the offer. I've accepted it. I've notified you before you notified me that you had satisfied the conditions to move from selling close to close. So it's very important. One of the biggest cases I had as a lawyer 15 years ago was this exact thing that was happening. We had multiple people trying to buy the house in all places, Friarsgate, that just became this big battle over it as to did they get the notice to the other party before the other party accepted another contract. And also understand that you can provide the notice not only to the agent, but if you feel like the agent's dodging you, you can also go give the notice to the broker. And that's what they did in this situation, was that the other agent was avoiding the one agent because they knew another offer was going to come in for more money. So they were avoiding the person trying to notify them that they had completed the contingency. So they were just ignoring them, wouldn't return their emails, phone calls, or anything to accept it. And so what that agent did was got in their car, drove to the broker's office and handed them the written notification and had the receptionist at the office sign something saying they received it at this time. And they won because they were able to prove that they provided the notice and that it had been the date and the time before the other one was signed and ratified. So it's very important that you win that race and not sit around waiting for things to happen. All right. Paragraph B, buyer to provide documentation associated with the sale of the buyer's property upon request. If they want a copy of the contract, it is fine for you to take a black magic marker and redact the amount and redact the parties. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's what I would recommend you do. But you have to provide that information to prove that the property is actually under contract. Seller can continue to market the property for sale. However, at this point now, because we have moved from sell and close to close contingency, you may only accept contracts as backup contracts. Nothing can bump this contract out of first position at this point, once you be moved over from selling close to close. Buyer to notify seller in writing of any changes regarding the sale of the property. So again, if anything that makes that sell that property delayed or possibly fall through, you have a duty. Not only do you have a duty under this contract, but you have a duty under our state law. If you don't remember that, 40-57, the definition of a adverse material fact is if you have belief or understanding or any information that the property would not close, that one of the parties does not intend to close or cannot close, you have to notify the other property. So not only do you have a contractual duty here to notify the other property, other owner, or other party of the negative issue, but you also have a duty under the contract, or under the statute to do so. I'm sorry, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, as y'all can tell. Today I'm stumbling through this. Paragraph E, if contract on buyer's property is voided, buyer to notify seller in writing within 1 business day, and either remove the closing contingency with written verification from the financial institution of the ability to proceed. So again, if Matt has moved from selling close to close, and then all of a sudden he finds out that the person buying his house, the deal fell through, Matt has to notify me. And if he wants to move forward with a contract, he's got to notify me within 1 business day that he's removing the contingency. And here's the information from his financial institution saying that he can proceed with the sale, that he's got the financial ability to close. The second option is Matt can say, I can't close without selling my property, as I told you in the first place. So I'm going to move now to a sell and close contingency. By agreement of both parties, we go back to how it was in the beginning. We go back to the sell and close contingency. We're no longer in a close. If we can't reach an agreement, contract becomes null and void. Earnest money gets released back to the buyer. So he's got a couple of options there. If Matt's deal falls through, to reiterate, he can remove the contingency, proving that he can buy my property without selling his. He can move back to the sell and close contingency, or he can void the contract and gets his earnest money back. So the whole point of what we've done here is really just trying to clarify some of the issues that we had seen over the years as to, is the property listed? If so, when's it? If it's not, when's it going to be listed? Who's it going to be listed with? Making sure everybody understands what happens when certain events happen, whether the contract on the buyer's house falls through. Do we move to back up automatically? Is it voided, and things like that? So I think we've done a good job here of kind of cleaning up some of the issues in the sell and close. Again, our purpose here of trying to do it the way we've done is that if you're under a sell and close contingency and you complete the requirements to move to a sale contingency, understand that once you complete those requirements and you provide notification that you've completed those requirements, you automatically move to the closed contingency. There is no need to go in and re-sign another addendum to the contract. You don't have to go in and get the sale contingency and sign it and do all that. It automatically becomes a sale contingency contract. All right, so those are the changes to the 2 documents. Becky and Matt, I know, have been answering some of the questions and making some of the points that I'd missed. If anybody has any questions, let's handle those now.
Hey, Gary, could you just address the inspections? We had a great question from Sally, where just the difference between inspection / due diligence and contingencies. She said that wouldn't the two parts of the document conflict? If you scroll up a little bit, Gary, on the sale and closing.
As far scroll down.
Right there, yeah. So 3A I and 3A 2. She wanted to make sure that where it says there are no active contingencies in this contract other than financing.
Right.
That doesn't conflict with I. No, I'll keep going down. Top of the next page.
Okay.
Active contingencies, and then the one above it where it says due diligence period either are completed or not completed.
Right. It doesn't conflict because we're allowing the parties to negotiate whether or not the repairs are required to be completed beforehand.
But then also due diligence is not a contingency, correct?
Right. Due diligence is not a contingency. And we wanted to make sure everybody understood those were separate issues. The inspection here, y'all get to negotiate whether those have to be completed or not. That's not a contingency. What we're talking about with contingencies here, Financing is a contingency, contingency on appraisal, contingency on me getting a job at the University of South Carolina, contingent on me selling my house. And that's where we see these things. And that's one of the things the committee talked about, is that the big contingencies are really worried about is I'm selling my house to Matt under a sell and close contingency. Well, now he's selling it to Becky, his house, under a sell and close contingency. That's a big contingency because Matt can't move to a closed contingency because he doesn't even know if his house is going to sell because Becky's not buying his house until she sells her house. So now we have a sell and close on a sell and close on a sell and close. I mean, these are the contingencies we're talking about that need to be really disclosed. All right. Any other questions?
I think we got all the other questions, unless is anybody not satisfied with one of the answers that was given?
Well, Matt, I was just going to bring up, I know you answered it and you looked at the contract, but somebody mentioned about using SCR form 500. Gary, do you have any concerns about using CCRA and SCR forms?
Yeah, I think you need to stay in the same form family. If you're using SCR contract, and use SCR addendums. If you're using a CCRA contract, use CCRA addendums. And the point being is, throughout this contract, you'll see where it says see contract paragraph 6D. Well, paragraph 6D is referenced in the CCRA contracts. Paragraph 6D might not even exist in the state contract. In fact, I don't think there's a 6D in the state contract. So it's very important to stay within that family of contracts because all these contracts are referencing things that are in our contract and not things that are in the state contract. The second thing I would say in a more general sense is that you're a CCRA market. If you are selling property in Richland and Lexington County, part of Kershaw, you're mainly a CCRA community. And so it's better to use the contract that's used in our community because the inspectors, the repair companies, the lenders, the title companies, everybody understands these contracts. And when you start bringing in, and the agents, when you start bringing in contracts that are not predominantly used in our industry, you start bringing in terms and facts that aren't readily known to all of these parties involved. So it's always best in our community to use CCRA. I say the same thing up in Greenville, even though I think CCRA contract's a better contract than the state contract, it's better for them in Greenville and Spartanburg to be using the state contract because that is the predominant contract in their marketplace. So use our CCRA contract in the Midlands and use the addendums that are associated with it because of the reference to the terms in that contract.
Gary, in regard to written notice of their property going under contract, they were, Darcy was asking about SCR form 500. So it would not be necessarily part of the contract, but as a tool to give notice.
So that, I don't know what SCR form 500 is. I apologize.
That form is a super simple form that just says that the buyer has accepted an offer on their property. That's like a 2-line document, but
I'm okay with that. I would prefer that we had our own document so that we stay within the family of contract. I think maybe that's something the contract committee needs to maybe make. That would be a real simple document for us to make. I think we need to stay within the CCRA family of documents. And I just don't like going over to the other documents. But if that's all that contract form says, if SCR form 500 just says that, then that would be fine to use that in this situation. I just get very hesitant to say use SCR forms when they may reference provisions in their contract. And that's where it starts getting conflicting terms.
Yeah, it's designed to satisfy their sale and closing contingency, which I
apologize, Darcy. I didn't know that was the form. Yeah, that's a good question Darcy had there. I didn't know that was the form. I apologize, but I do think that the contract committee, we should make that form ourselves.
Yeah. Paige has a good point here too in the question and answer that CCRA. She asked if CCRA has a general addendum. I don't think we do have a general addendum. The state has a general addendum, but I don't think that we do.
Yeah, in fact, I was remembering you, Paige, your comment. We don't even have just regular blank addenda, so that will be added to the list of stuff to talk about, so that we can stay more within our own family of forms.
Yeah. And I do want to on another note,
we do have that section, whatever it is now, section 22 or 21, whatever that used to be section 18 on the contract, that you can add in whatever you want to add in.
Right.
Some lines after the contingency paragraph also. So if it's a simple thing, you can put it in there without needing a separate addendum.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to address on a completely different note, Danny Hood brings up, and I appreciate Danny bringing this up. He and I've had many long discussions about this. under 3A1. This was not something that we lightly did under advisement. I mean, we spent a lot of time negotiating at the contract committee about this one provision. Do we just change it and say that the due diligence period doesn't have to be completed? Do we leave it as is? Because it used to say the due diligence period was completed. And so you can look at it from two ways. One way is as a seller, if Matt has made a sell and close contingency offer on my property and he accepts a contract from Becky and he notifies me, once he notifies me, remember we moved to close contingency. Once he completes those requirements, we move to close contingency. If Becky and his contract falls through because Becky does an inspection and finds out that Matt's house is a hellhole, well, I might have denied another offer that came through, because once, remember, you move to close contingency, I can't take anything but a backup offer. So Matt's buying my house on a sell and close contingency. Becky offers him a house. I've checked the box, not complete. He now moves to close contingency. Taylor shows up with a better offer than all of them. I'm like, well, sorry, guys, I'm already under contract with Matt. And he's already moved from a sell and close to a closed contingency. And then Becky goes in, does the first inspection and goes, wow, this house is a piece of crap. I'm not buying that. Well, now Matt doesn't have a closed contingency anymore. He's moved back to sell and close. In the meantime, Taylor's gone and bought Kim's house. So that's one side of it. Okay. Now let me offer the other side, because lawyers can talk out of both sides of their mouth, right? So let's talk on the other side of the mouth. And this is what Danny's point is, is that he makes an offer, Matt, and it's under a sell and close contingency. Becky makes that offer. They can't come to me. He's now accepted Becky's deal. They're in the middle of due diligence for 10 days. In the meantime, Taylor shows up and says, I want to buy your house. Well, Matt's still in a sell and close. So I'm taking Taylor's offer. Now Matt is under contract with Becky. Becky doesn't cancel the contract. She wants to buy it. So now Matt has to sell his house to Becky, but I've already bumped Matt out and moved to Taylor. Where's Matt going to go? So neither is very palatable. And so I've had this discussion with a lot of you, and a lot of y'all that represent the sellers tell me the first story. Poor Gary turned down Taylor's better offer because Matt got under contract with Becky, but now Becky's canceled the contract under the due diligence, and that's not fair to the seller. But then I've had several of you, like Danny, take Danny's point, saying, well, we were under due diligence. We were already moving forward. We thought this was a good to go, but now you sold the house to somebody else. We've completed due diligence, and now my seller my buyer, who is also a seller, has no house to buy, and inventory sucks, so they're never going to find a house. So now what are they going to do? There's no answer to it.
Hey, Gary, one of the reasons, like our forms in general with the contract committee, we try to create forms that, while we might realize something in the market has happened that we need to consider things from a different perspective, but we also want it to be fair to buyer and seller, make things negotiable and not mandate things if we shouldn't. And it needs to stand the test of time where, the market it may be a seller's market. It may be a buyer's market. Leave it up to the parties to decide that. And just stressing that, we as agents shouldn't advise our sellers in every scenario that they should never take a sale and closing contingency, or that it should always be through due diligence. It's you give the facts and then the client decides whether they're comfortable with that. But so that's why we, after much time knowing that it was needed to be done, we did it. It took a while because then we opened lots of other cans of worms. But I think we all feel like overall the form gives great options and details, so people are mindful of what really could or could not happen based on what they're agreeing to.
So you can see there, just that exercise, basically how it happens on the contract committee, because one person would argue my first point, and then another person would argue the second point, and then you're at a stalemate because the one side's arguing this, say it's not fair to the seller, and then the other side says, well, it's not fair to the buyer because the buyer may get screwed in this. And so that's where the committee comes up with compromises and does exactly what Becky said. Is like, why are we making it one way or the other? Let the parties decide. That's what the whole thing is. We're trying to give the power to the parties, let the parties decide instead of us deciding for the parties. And I thought this was probably the best thing that we've done on this form.
It then allows the form to be a little bit dynamic, where in a seller's market, there's probably one way you're going to negotiate this contract most of the time. In a buyer's market, it's probably going to get negotiated the other way. But
Right.
it, you know, that it accomplished what we needed it to accomplish, where, you know, hopefully, Danny, you know, in your point, you're able to advise your clients of the shortfalls or the pitfalls of, you know, taking one checkbox or the other checkbox, and in another scenario, you know, they're able to advise their client the other way. So
And think about how good agents can really win these situations. A good agent like Danny's a good agent. He might have already gone for his buyer who has to sell their property. He might have already said, look, you know, when we're going to make this offer, we don't want this offer to have to be contingent on the repaired addendum and the due diligence period to be done. So let's go ahead and have a pre-inspection done. So Danny might talk to his seller about going hiring somebody like Frank Boysia, who's going to find everything in the world wrong with your house. A good friend of mine. Frank's going to go out there and do an inspection. He's going to come back and give the house a clean bill of health. So when Danny makes this offer for his client, he's going to check the box that they are not to have to be, that doesn't have to be completed. And he's going to give me a copy of the pre-inspection saying, hey, we've already had the home inspected, so there's no issues here with repairs. And so he's going to give me some warm and fuzzy so that I can go to my client and say, you know, he's gone out and already done this pre-inspection. You can look, Frank Boyce is one of the best in the business. Let's look at how he's done it. Everything looks good to me. So the chances of this falling through because of repair issues is going to be very slim. So I think we're okay to take this not completed. Now, on the other hand, if this house is built in 1953 and the roof hasn't been replaced ever, you know, I might need to know that as a seller, whether I'm going to start taking these not completed, because I know somebody who's going to buy that house is going to want a lot of work done before they're going to accept that contract. So
and all
this
of
is
those
where an agent can shine by providing information about the house that the buyer has to sell.
all of those are done in the negotiation. So all of those are questions that you can ask when somebody sends you an offer that's, you know, contingent on the sale and close, and it's got one of those checkboxes checked. Those are all questions you can ask before you advise the seller on anything. Like, hey, maybe we should ask them, you know, have they had it inspected? Because if they have, I'd love to see that inspection before we agree on it, either one of these. You know, has the roof been replaced? Is there, you know, what has it been under contract yet and fallen through before? You know, any of those questions you can ask, and, you know, they can answer or not answer, but that informs your decision on whether you're going to be okay with one checkbox or the other.
Right, because as a listing agent, you might provide me that Frank Boyce inspection, and it says it needs a new air conditioner, new roof, and it's got water damage. Well, I'm pretty much not going to agree to give you a not completed addendum at that point. I want it completed because I know whoever buys that house is going to ask for those 3 repairs. So excellent opportunity for y'all to be top agents as you are. All right.
Okay. Oh, looks like we just have one more question. So Lisa asked Gary a question on having a seller do an inspection prior to listing. Are they now required to disclose this inspection report?
You're required to do what's required under the seller disclosure form. So whatever the South Carolina seller disclosure form requires you, if you do an inspection and you find those items in your seller disclosure inaccurate, incomplete, or misleading, then you have a duty to either repair them or update it. So whatever information you find in that inspection report, compare it to your seller disclosure form and update it.
Okay.
Now, I'm not going to, I could spend a whole hour. I mean, that's the short answer. The long answer could also be your duty to, there's a problem in the statute that we're trying to rewrite. We've defined material adverse facts in a certain way, but then we also require you to disclose material adverse facts. But then there's also a statute in there that talks about disclosing known defects to the property. Well, is it material adverse facts or is it known defects? So yeah, if you do an inspection, my position is this: disclose, disclose, disclose. I believe we had a 4-hour MCE class on that about 4 years ago called disclose, disclose, disclose. If you do an inspection and you find something that is not on the seller disclosure form, that is still something that should be disclosed to a reasonable human being, then disclose it. You never win by not disclosing.
Okay. All right. I don't see any more questions.
I was going to say, Kendall asked a question. She brought up link verbiage. She might be referring to that SCR form 500, maybe something else. It definitely conflicts with our CCRA contract of sale, introduces new terms regarding if seller receives a subsequent offer. anyway, that would definitely conflict. I'm just putting a note in there for the record in case anyone's reading the notes later, but I don't think we would want to introduce, or it would be wise to introduce a form from SCR into our contract. Like
Yeah, and that's a good point, even though it may be only 2 sentences, if it has some language in there, because remember, their CL100s are separate from their due diligence. It is not combined. In the CCRA contract, CL100 is part of due diligence. It's not separate. And so there may be a statement in there that CCRA in the SCR contract that it doesn't apply to the CL100. I don't know. I haven't looked at it. So just be very careful before you do that to make sure there's no other terms in there. And the problem with it is it's something that you might not even look at as being an issue, might be a conflicting term, such as the CL100.
All right, I don't see any
Well,
more questions.
I think that Kendall, what she was talking about, Becky, was adding in the other terms, adding like a first right of refusal type thing, or like a
Yeah, let's talk about that if that's okay with Taylor and Kim to spend a couple more minutes on that. First right of refusals. I'm not a big fan of it, and I'll tell you why. You've made me an offer that's contingent, and the reason you made me an offer that's contingent is because of your inability to do something. If you can buy my house without selling your house, you'd made me an offer without selling your house. And so what happens is a lot of times when people give them a first right of refusal, is 2 problems. One is I have never seen such piss poor writing in my life when people simply write first right of refusal or a buyer has first right of refusal. What is the right of refusal? Is it to remove the contingency? Is it to match the other price? Is it to beat the other price? And so we get into conflicts all the time when people write in there that, you know, the house is contingent on a selling close, but it's and then they'll put in there buyer has first right of refusal to buy the property if another offer is presented. Okay, first right of refusal for what? I mean, what are we refusing? To match the other offer that comes in? And is it matching just the price, or is it matching everything? Is it the identical contract? Maybe the other party's offering less money, but is closing with cash in 5 days. Your first right of refusal is what? Is it to match the price? Is it to close with cash? Is it to close within 5 days? Is it to remove your contingency? None of the ones I've ever seen written address that. They just put language, first right of refusal to match the offer. Okay, what match offer? Is it price? What is it? So these things are so piss poor written, they scare the snot out of me. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've had to deal with 2 agents calling me because this is what the first right of refusal says, and they want me to tell them what it means. I'm like, I didn't write it, y'all wrote it. And so now we're trying to figure out, what is this buyer who had this right of refusal, what do they have to do? And that's going to get y'all sued. So I don't like them from the standpoint is I don't think that y'all should be writing it. I agree with SCR, Nick, and Byron 100% on this. If you're going to do a first right of refusal, you better have a lawyer look at it because you're going to make a mistake and you're going to get sued. Second reason I don't like the first right of refusal is if they were able to buy the property in the first place, they wouldn't have given you the offer that was contingent. And so what happens is when another offer comes in, they say, oh, I'll exercise my first right of refusal if we can figure out what that even means, and they'll exercise it. And all that means now is they're still in the same situation. They're still trying to figure out, can they sell their house? And if they can't sell their house in order to buy your house, then they'll just default on the contract and recognize that all they'll lose is the earnest money in most situations. So it's a gamble to them. What do they care? They got $1,000 earnest money at it. Selling closed contingency, I'll remove it, sure. And then they get to the bottom line, they still got to closing, and sold my house, I'm in default. Sorry, take my earnest money, my $1,000. Now, we know that you're gonna hem and haw and say, we're gonna sue you, but the reality of it is you're not. And so they gambled their $1,000 and tied your house up. So I don't like them. I think you are setting yourself up for lawsuit. Now, my good friend Franklin Jones, I think it was, could argue with me for 30 minutes about that. Franklin and I have argued over this before, and as we've argued over a lot of stuff, taxes and other things. But that's my opinion on them. I'd be very, very hesitant to ever do a first right of refusal. And if I did one, I sure as hell wouldn't draw it up yourself. I'd have your closing attorney draft it for you.
The one that we usually see, Gary, it's essentially, I think most agents in the market have realized first right of refusal is not defined properly, and they've run into an issue where, like you said, it could be, oh, okay, I'm removing my contingency. No, you had a first right of refusal, so you have to match the other offer, not just remove your contingency. So now the ones we see usually are, 24-hour period to remove the contingency and proceed forward. And I've always thought that that was okay until you run into an issue like you're talking about, where, okay, we remove the contingency, but there's no language in there that says we have to prove that we can remove the contingency and still be able to buy the house. So the language that you put on there, Kendall, I think that's the concern with that language is, yeah, you could put that on there, but I mean, if they had to make it a contingent offer and couldn't buy the house, what's changed? You know,
Right, nothing's changed.
So
Nothing's changed, yeah. And then they'll say, okay, and the ones that do say, well, the first right of refusal is you'll match the other offer. That person thinks matching the other offer is simply matching the price. But as agents, y'all know there's more to a contract than price. Y'all were receiving 45 offers on one property. All the prices were essentially the same. So what did y'all start doing? You started eliminating the ones that were state housing. You started eliminating the ones that were rural housing. You started going for the ones that were cash closings. You went for the ones that had no due diligence provisions, as is provisions. You started looking at the ones that were closing in 5 days. And so there are a lot of terms in those contracts. It's not just matching the sales price. It's matching all of those terms is what I would be looking at as a seller if I'm going to give you the first right of refusal. But rarely, if ever, is that spelled out in your first right of refusal addendums. I would say 50% of the first right of refusals I see say nothing more than buyer has first right of refusal. That's all it says. No one knows what that means. And then the other 50% are a little bit better. Buyer has first right of refusal to match price if another offer is accepted. Okay, well, I don't think that's exactly what your seller was intending. I think they meant they would match all the terms of the contract. But again, nothing's more spelled out than that. I think I did a podcast on first right of refusal, by the way, if you want more information on that. Free plug for Gary and Dish and Dirt.
Well, and also, I mean, that all of those complications, people ask why we didn't do a first right of refusal document, or why a first right of refusal isn't built into one of these, contingencies. And it's because they're so complex, and who knows what you want to match and how many check boxes we have to have in that thing. So if you really want to use it, talk to an attorney and have them write it up for you.
Yep. All right. Well, I appreciate y'all's time today. I appreciate y'all letting me stumble through the first part of that. Like I said, I took a melatonin about 2 o'clock last night, so I think it's still in my system.
Yeah, Gary said he was going to talk for 30 minutes and it's an hour, but
yeah, I've never talked for 30 minutes.
Weird.
Well, I did talk for 35 minutes. I did questions for 20. So
yeah.
Counts for something.
Yeah. But no, appreciate everybody being on here for this webinar. This will be posted on our social media sites for you to go back to, and YouTube. Definitely encourage any brokers on here to use it as a training video. All the videos we've done for our contracts are on our YouTube page, so definitely encourage any new agents to go on there and watch those and kind of better your service to your clients and customers. But appreciate our panel, Gary, Becky, Matt, and hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
See you, everybody.
Bye.